I was dealt a heartbreaking blow when my husband walked away from me during my cancer treatment, and then, 4 years down the road, he suddenly wanted me back, completely oblivious to the fact that I was cancer-free, and sharing a home with the ex he had always been so envious of. 5 whole years ago, I got married to my former spouse, Jerry, and about 12 months into our marriage, he vanished right when I needed him most. Back then, both of us were just 25 years old, and we had been a couple for approximately 3 years after college. We had decided to get married because, at the time, it appeared to be the most natural step forward. We were genuinely content with each other, or at least that is what I believed. We had been married for something like 4 months when I received the news that changed my life. I had stage 2 cervical cancer. The symptoms had been creeping up for a couple of months, but we chalked them up to routine fatigue or run-of-the-mill sickness. However, as my condition deteriorated, we took it seriously and sought a formal diagnosis, which indeed confirmed our worst fears. From that point on, I was inside and outside the hospital on a frequent basis, and initially, Jerry was incredibly supportive. He truly went above and beyond to tend to my every need. He handled my endless medical documentation, stayed in constant contact with the doctors, and did everything possible to ensure I had one less thing to worry about. Even when I started my chemotherapy sessions and began losing my hair in heartbreaking clumps, Jerry shaved his head to show solidarity, which touched me deeply and gave me some glimmer of hope. Those first couple of months, he was nothing short of astonishing. I felt genuinely protected and cared for. But then, as time dragged on and my condition failed to improve in any obvious or dramatic way, Jerry started losing hope. Over half a year had passed by then, and I had gone through round after round of treatment, each one taking a toll on my body. Despite everyone's best efforts, I was not showing any real progress, and to our collective horror, I was actually getting weaker by the day. Jerry began pulling away from me emotionally, retreating into his own world, and no matter how much I tried to reach out to him, coax him to talk openly, he would shut me out. I felt unbelievably hurt, because I was already dealing with a terrifying, life-threatening battle, and on top of that, his coldness made it feel like he was dismissing me entirely. Desperate for some sort of reaction, I would pick fights with him just to force him to pay attention to me. That strategy only worked for a short time, then he withdrew even further, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. Then came the day, precisely 2 weeks before our 1-year wedding anniversary, when I opened my eyes in the morning to find that he was gone. All he left behind was a cruel note on our bedside table, telling me not to bother trying to find him, because he simply did not wish to be found. At first, I thought maybe this was some elaborate trick, so I called and messaged him repeatedly, but to no avail. It dawned on me pretty quickly that he had blocked my number and even blocked me on all social media platforms, leaving me dumbfounded and frantic. I reached out to my in-laws in a flurry of panic, but they claimed they knew nothing about any of it and told me they would get back to me if they heard anything. They never did. In a state of utter disbelief and shock, I informed my parents, who promptly moved in with me to provide whatever help I needed, assuming my husband would only be gone for a short while. But he never returned. He effectively vanished from my life for good, taking with him any sense of stability or reassurance I once knew. Recovering from that trauma took an immense amount of time and emotional healing, and I spiraled into a prolonged depression that felt very dark. In the ensuing days and weeks, I tried contacting my in-laws multiple times, naively hoping they might assist in locating Jerry, but I might as well have been calling into a void. Finally, about a month later, they showed up at my doorstep with an unmistakably distant attitude, and I soon discovered their visit was strictly for serving me with divorce papers. I was appalled, shattered, and numb all at once. It was clear they had known about Jerry's whereabouts, but had chosen not to reveal anything. They insisted that Jerry wanted no further involvement with me and extended some hollow expression of regret, telling me it just had to end in this manner, because he felt he couldn't waste his life with me any longer. Hearing that was agonizing. It was painfully obvious the only reason he had walked away was because I was struggling with cancer, and he had no interest in supporting me. And while I could imagine how difficult it might have been for him, the stress, the guilt, the uncertainty, the smallest courtesy he could have shown was talking with me, having even one straightforward discussion about his emotions, his worries, our shared future. Yet he decided I wasn't worthy of a final conversation. I needed time to make sense of it, but soon after his parents handed me those divorce documents, I signed them without causing a fuss. I knew there was nothing left to battle for, and I wanted to exit this disastrous chapter of my life with my dignity intact. I had a lawyer go over everything meticulously, but as far as divorces go, it was all quite straightforward, particularly since there were no shared assets in our short-lived marriage. We both wanted a clean break with no extended conflict, and because it was an uncontested divorce, it went through without us ever having to meet in person. My lawyer simply communicated any questions or instructions to Jerry's parents and lawyer, and that was the last of it. We never even laid eyes on each other. After the dust settled, I stopped hearing from my in-laws as well. Although I was devastated beyond words, I knew I still had to keep pushing forward, if only for the sake of my own survival. My health took a turn for the worse, mostly thanks to the heartbreak compounding my already fragile condition, but my parents remained steadfastly by my side, doing everything they could, despite how it pained them to see me in such a miserable state. I realized I owed it not just to myself, but also to my family to fight for my life, to rally for a second chance. Whether it was a mental shift or the treatments finally hitting their mark, something clicked, and I managed to survive. Nowadays, I'm doing much better, and for the past 3 months, I've been declared cancer-free. It was an uphill battle every single step of the way, and it has taken me 4 years of constant recovery and reflection to genuinely appreciate my own resilience. Learning to be thankful for being alive, I also decided it was time to be open to love once again. That is precisely why, 6 months ago, I said yes to letting my ex-boyfriend move in with me. Now, to give a little background, my ex, the man I'm currently with, is someone I originally met in college, back when life seemed so much simpler. We dated for 2 years, but broke up, because our aspirations just didn't align. Let's call him Andy. Both Andy and Jerry moved in the same social circle I was in, so we were all acquainted, though not necessarily close at first. After graduation, we stopped keeping in touch, and it was only months after Andy and I parted ways that Jerry reached out to me. We reconnected as friends, and before long, Jerry expressed that he had been harboring a crush on me back when I was with Andy, but had resisted doing anything about it. Now that Andy and I were no longer together, Jerry wanted a chance to explore a relationship with me. He was patient in his pursuit, and after a few months, I agreed to date him. From the start, Jerry was oddly insecure when it came to Andy, as if he couldn't let go of the idea that I might still have feelings for him. Even though Andy and I had attempted to remain friendly post-breakup, I gradually distanced myself from him and ultimately blocked him altogether, largely for Jerry's comfort. I had sincerely loved Jerry and wished to make him feel secure, so I sacrificed a friendship that I did value. I later heard from our mutual circle that Andy had been pretty upset with my sudden disappearance from his life. Being ghosted is never pleasant. But there was little I could do at the time, especially since I genuinely believed Jerry was the person I was meant to be with. We eventually got married, and that was that. Andy vanished from my thoughts completely. But then, my marriage ended in divorce, painfully, I might add, and though I never publicized it in any dramatic fashion, I did mention it to a handful of friends. I suppose that's how Andy came to learn about both my divorce and my cancer diagnosis. Roughly 5 months after my divorce was finalized, Andy reached out to me with a warm, compassionate email. He wrote that he was genuinely sorry for everything I had gone through, both the split from Jerry and the battle with cancer. He mentioned wanting to be friends again, but understood that it was entirely my choice. He didn't want to pressure me. There was a distinct kindness in his tone that truly touched me. He emphasized that he would forever be an open ear if I needed someone to confide in. At the time, I was still reeling from Jerry's abandonment, so I left Andy's email unanswered for 10 long months. In that period, I often thought about reaching out to him, but couldn't muster up the emotional strength to do it. Eventually, though, 10 months down the line, I had made enough peace with Jerry's betrayal to reconsider Andy's offer of friendship. My own friends encouraged me to open that door again, if only in a platonic sense. So I finally replied, just to put an end to the lingering awkwardness, and be on civil terms with someone who had been important in my past. Our correspondence resumed, starting out completely platonic, and we rediscovered that we still connected on a level that was special to both of us. Gradually, we rekindled our bond in a warm, supportive way, which was a huge comfort to me. Having Andy to talk to so frequently eased the loneliness, and gave me renewed confidence in human connections. My parents noticed how uplifted I was every time I chatted with him, and they wholeheartedly supported this revitalized friendship. In the beginning, everything stayed online, but soon enough, he began stopping by for visits. Step by step, the emotional distance between us began to shrink, though I was initially hesitant to think about starting any new relationship, especially one with a man who had once been such a significant part of my life. Yet Andy never gave up hope. Last year, he confessed to me that he had never truly stopped loving me. Learning that I had been with Jerry had broken his heart, but seeing me happy was enough for him to keep his distance. Now that Jerry was out of the picture, and we were friends again, he admitted that he wanted to be honest with me. Though he didn't presume I'd want to jump back into romance, he felt compelled to be forthright about his feelings. I respected his openness, but found myself in a muddle of emotions. 3 years had passed since my divorce, and the painful memories still haunted me. I never received genuine closure from Jerry, which complicated my ability to move forward. Yet even in the midst of this confusion, my closest friends and my parents all pointed out that 3 entire years of silence from Jerry indicated he was never coming back. They urged me to grant myself permission to look ahead, to open my heart to Andy, who clearly cared for me more deeply than words could capture. Besides, my health had improved, and after nearly losing my life, I realized how precious time could be. Their advice struck a chord, so I decided to give Andy a real chance. A couple of weeks after his heartfelt confession, we stepped into a new phase of our relationship. After a few more months together, he announced that he wanted to take care of me in every sense. He wished to move in with me and be there for me each and every day. Given the fact that he was already spending most of his free hours at my place, I, alongside my parents, figured it made sense. So 6 months ago, we began cohabitating. It felt blissful having him around, and once he got into the rhythm of my daily routine, my parents moved out to give us space to build our life together. They still drop by regularly, of course, but now they have the freedom to enjoy their own time as well. We've also discussed marriage as a potential step in the future, but for now, we are just basking in the warmth of our relationship. After the ordeal I've been through, the years of medical treatments and heartbreak, I'm simply grateful to be cancer-free and to share my life with Andy, who consistently shows how much he values me. Things were sailing smoothly, at least until a few days ago when Jerry decided to resurface out of nowhere. It turns out he had unblocked me on every platform, and sent me a Facebook message apologizing profusely for how he had acted. He told me I didn't deserve any of the pain he inflicted upon me and acknowledged that I had no control over falling ill or how my body reacted to treatment. He admitted that he'd been overwhelmed by frustration and had foolishly taken the coward's escape, running away instead of facing the reality that he was unhappy or unable to cope. After detailing how he felt sorry, he came right out and said that more than anything, he desired a second chance with me, an opportunity to rekindle our marriage. According to him, the last 4 years had been marked by nothing but regret and an aching longing for my presence. He insisted that he was prepared to step up now, even if it meant looking after me if my health remained compromised. He was apparently ready to make any sacrifice, if I would just let him back into my life. I chose to have him come over, but my reasons were far from romantic. The truth is, I was utterly livid upon receiving his message, because it was clear that he believed I'd greet him with open arms and no bitterness about how he treated me. He seemed to have no clue I was in remission, and that I was happily cohabitating with Andy. The idea that he assumed I would still be clinging to him after 4 long years of silence and neglect was beyond infuriating. I decided to teach him a lesson by inviting him over so he could witness firsthand the life he'd forfeited. On the day Jerry arrived at my doorstep, bearing flowers and chocolates like some grand gesture, I threw open the door and promptly summoned Andy over to join us. I wanted Jerry to see immediately that while I acknowledged his apology and his gifts, I had absolutely no intention of reuniting with him. As soon as Jerry laid eyes on Andy, he lost control. Understandably, Andy was the person he'd always been the most jealous of, so it hit him where it hurt the most. He blew up at me, yelling about betrayal, making outrageous accusations that I had cheated on him. His logic made no sense to me, because how could I cheat on him when we weren't even together at the time Andy and I got back together? Nonetheless, his fury was so immense that it barely mattered what I said. My plan was simply to give him the shock of his life, so I didn't care. I closed the door on him while he was still ranting on my porch, and Andy and I returned to the living room to continue watching TV. I hadn't told Andy the full scope of my intentions beforehand, but he was unperturbed. He understood where my head was at and supported me anyway. However, my parents and some of my friends believe I was being needlessly dramatic and inviting negativity into my life. And in hindsight, I can see that they may have a valid point, because after Jerry stormed away, my in-laws began bombarding me with messages, attacking me for being cold-hearted. They demanded to know why I had invited their son over only to embarrass him in such a deliberate way, and they insisted that he had come with nothing but remorse and a genuine desire to patch things up. They accused me of tormenting him emotionally and even suggested I had been carrying on with Andy all along, which is laughable given that for the last 4 years, I had been fully focused on fighting for my health, not to mention the fact that I blocked Andy years earlier to reassure Jerry. It baffled me that they had the nerve to claim such nonsense. They painted me as a villain who had ensnared their poor, innocent son when, in reality, it was Jerry who had left me at my weakest moment. My own parents and friends, though not nearly as aggressive, did mention that they thought I had stooped to pettiness. They weren't exactly outraged by my behavior, but they didn't feel it was the most mature choice. I felt a pang of guilt, as though I could have sidestepped the spectacle completely by not answering Jerry's initial message. I admit to being petty, but I don't think it warrants an apology to Jerry, especially when you consider the gravity of what he did. Abandoning me while I was literally fighting for my life is a colossal wrongdoing. Neither he nor his parents seemed sorry back then, so I see no reason to give them the kindness they never extended to me. That brings me to where I asked myself whether I was in the wrong for summoning my former husband home, just so I could flaunt my new life. Not too long ago, I posted this situation somewhere and got a ton of feedback. The first thing I did was talk to my parents and close friends about why I acted the way I did. I admitted that I was childish to some extent and acknowledged that there were simpler, cleaner ways to avoid any interaction with Jerry. The truth is, I felt compelled to face him in that impulsive moment, because I wanted some sense of closure. I made a rushed decision in a surge of emotion, and while it wasn't the wisest approach, I also don't regret it. My family and friends didn't have much to add. They merely reiterated that they didn't fully condone my actions, but they understood my perspective. None of them pressured me to atone, or anything like that. We simply agreed that we had slightly different viewpoints. It wasn't a massive conflict, so after we had our talk, we left it behind us. My in-laws, on the other hand, have been the real issue. They're outraged, claiming I've traumatized Jerry by calling him over and blindsiding him. They believe I owe him an in-person apology, plus they want me to assure him that I wasn't sneaking around with Andy before the divorce. It's absurd. They've sent multiple emails claiming Jerry is falling apart emotionally because of me. I simply don't understand how they can demand such a monumental olive branch from me when, during my worst days, they never showed me the courtesy of a simple conversation, or any form of kindness. They concealed Jerry's location, and helped him maintain radio silence, until they felt like springing divorce papers on me. So I'm responding to them by applying their own standard. If Jerry felt no need to confront me with explanations, or compassion back then, I see no reason to extend that courtesy now, especially after all this time. A few days after that, I found out they decided to show up at my house in the morning, presumably, because they guessed Andy would be gone at work, though he wasn't. Both Jerry and his parents came up to my front door, demanding that I give Jerry a proper explanation to ease his confusion, complaining that they simply cannot allow their son to be in such a state. I felt my eyes roll to the back of my head. I swiftly told them I would not entertain this nonsense, and that Jerry had forfeited his right to clarity the minute he skipped out on me without so much as a goodbye. I advised them that they should leave before I dialed the police. Jerry then launched into a tirade, hurling insults and calling me names. He labeled me selfish and petty and spat curses. All that racket reached Andy, who hurried over to me, visibly furious, but he restrained himself from doing anything rash. I calmly pulled out my phone and began dialing, telling Jerry and his parents they had better go. They uttered a stream of vulgarities, not missing a chance to make a scene, but eventually retreated when it became apparent I was not bluffing. Andy had the presence of mind to record the entire altercation, capturing all the yelling and slanderous remarks. With that audio evidence, we decided that if they ever tried a stunt like this again, we would press charges and apply for a restraining order. I'm holding out hope it never comes to that, but at least we're prepared. I have no desire to get entangled in legal turmoil, if we can just live peacefully without further contact. Several more days passed without any new trouble from Jerry or his parents, and I felt a sense of relief beginning to settle in. I confided in some close friends, and they repeated that while my initial reaction to Jerry was definitely petty, the unhinged behavior coming from him and his parents was far worse. They suggested consulting a lawyer just in case, but I held off, not wanting to stir up additional tension. Then, surprisingly, I received an email from Jerry declaring that he was moving to Europe with his parents, and would not bother me again. Apparently, after he fled from me years ago, he relocated to California for a new job he had already been eyeing when we were still together. He admitted in the email that he hadn't wanted to talk to me about it back then, because he knew I wouldn't be able to move under such dire circumstances, and he also didn't want me to even attempt it, because he felt that would only deepen his guilt. So, as he put it, he took the coward's path and vanished to avoid the unpleasantness of confrontation. Over the past 4 years, he'd had some casual flings, but never a serious relationship, because he couldn't stop regretting how he had left things with me. Recently, he'd applied for another job opportunity in Europe, came back here for a few months to persuade his parents to join him overseas, and that's the reason he reached out, to offer me an apology, and see if there was any chance of rebuilding our broken marriage. But witnessing me with Andy, the one man he had always feared, had thrown reality in his face, making him realize he had no right to walk back into my life, or interrogate me. He finally owned up to being a coward and recognized that sending his parents after me, along with his tantrums, was totally inexcusable. He acknowledged Andy's devotion to me and concluded that he should leave us be. He finished by saying he never expected I would absolve him of his mistakes, nor did he think it would matter so late in the game, but he wanted me to know he was profoundly sorry, and that he understood he had overstepped. Reading that email gave me an enormous sense of relief. I didn't bother replying, but I did let Andy, my parents, and my close friends read it. We were all on the same page. It was finally time to close the door on that painful chapter, and move forward without baggage or lingering resentments. In all honesty, it was a relief to see Jerry come to these realizations by himself. Moreover, it felt like a conclusion I could accept. I'm embracing this resolution, because I'm in a place now where I can genuinely see a bright future. Andy and I have already been quietly talking about tying the knot in a few months, nothing rushed, just a gentle transition into the next chapter of our lives. I want to build a family, savor every day to the fullest, and treasure the second chance at life that I almost didn't get. Now, at long last, I feel like I have real closure on all fronts, and it's liberating. I never imagined I'd reach this point, but here I am, healthy and eager to start a new life with someone who has consistently shown unwavering love and support.